Hi and welcome to Code Without Code. A couple of years ago, before we started doing Code Without Code, we actually built a tool called KanyeText.com. It was really stupid, and what we did is that we sent Kanye West quotes out to people when they typed in their friends' phone numbers. It was a pretty ridiculous idea, but over the last couple of years, we've sent something like 10,000 Kanye West quotes to people. Every time we talk about KanyeText.com, what ends up happening is that people always say to us, oh, you should build a Trump version. In the past, we've done a Seinfeld version, and we've done a couple of other versions for other clients all over the world, but we could never think of an original thing to do with Trump. So this is a really good opportunity for us, and this video is really going to cover how to build a Trump text from the ground up. It'll cover payments, it'll cover the actual sending of random quotes at random intervals, and then it will also cover what to do when someone responds. So in the example I'm going to show you, what will happen is it will post to Twitter. So if you've ever wanted to build your own KanyeText.com or your own Trump text, this is the video for you. One of the hardest things about creating the actual text messaging tools is coming up with enough quotes. So if you go into the link below, you will see that we've actually created a template for you. So you can use this, and this is the template we will be using during this build. So if you go and fill in your email address, you'll receive it to your inbox straight away.
So if you do want to go and try out what this build is like, you can go to codewithoutcode/Trump text. Then if you want to see what the build is like and the instructions in a written form and get all of those hints and tips, you just need to go to codewithoutcode.com Trump text build instead.
Okay, so the first step for Donald Trump text is to actually take a payment. The reason why you want to take a payment is because actually sending these text messages costs money. So you want to recover the funds that you're actually going to pay to send these messages. So today, the way that we're actually going to do this is through two methods. The first one is going to be using Gravity Forms and a Stripe integration with Gravity Forms, which will send the details to Zapier, and then Zapier will write a line in the customer database. In order to get the customer database template, feel free to go to the link in the comments below and you can download the entire Google Sheet template that has the quotes included as well. This will save you a lot of time. The second way that we're going to do the payments is, in case you don't want to use Wordpress or Gravity Forms and you don't want to use Stripe, you can actually use Typeform. So it's the exact same process, but rather than it going through Gravity Forms and Stripe, we're just going to use Typeform. Typeform does have the option in the Pro version to actually use Stripe, so you could do this as well if you wanted. So we're going to build two, but to start with, we're going to use Gravity Forms and WordPress. So there are countless ways to actually do this, and on the Kanye text page, what we did is we put different boxes together for different message counts. So if you wanted 100 messages, it was a different price. And it was also all built through WordPress using a plugin. However, this time we're going to do it slightly differently. But ultimately, what you need to do is you need to pull through a friend's phone number, a status. So this is, have they just ordered? Has it been successfully paid? Has the actual text messages been sent? Then you want the number of messages to send. So if it's a plan that includes 5 messages or 10 messages, you then want another attribute for sent messages. So this is how many messages have been sent. You then want another attribute for the call to action, which is what you send at the very end. The rest of the information is totally up to you. You probably also want to include at least an email address because that will allow you to send them the details once a order has successfully completed. You can email them and let them know. So it's really up to you how you get to this point. In fact, you could really just type these details in manually and it would actually run. So that's one reason why we split the two payment details and the actual sending of the text messages into two different zaps. So what we've done today is that we're actually going to use a website, and the way that we're going to do it is through using the Gravity Forms plugin. So the way that this works is that you have a WordPress site, you install Gravity Forms, you install Stripe, and you install the Zapier add-in for it. And so when a payment is successfully made through this form, it's going to send a trigger to Zapier. So the way that we've set our form up looks like this. First name, last name, email address, the phone number, the base product price. So the way that we're doing this, and this will actually work if you go to this URL, is $2. And then for $2, you'll get 3 quotes. But then if you want for $2 extra, so a total of $4, you'll be able to send a total of 10 messages, and so on and so forth. So we've gone all the way up to 49 here because we happen to have 49 quotes in our list. So if you want to go and test that right now, you can. And then after that, what we do is we get the total field. And so this is just done on the side here. Once you install Gravity Forms and the payment Stripe add-on, you'll get this form as well. And then you can enter in your credit. Then you drop in the credit card details. For this to work, you actually need to go and set up your Stripe account, and you've got to drop in your API key. So I'm not going to show you doing that for obvious reasons. But one thing you will need to add in is your Zapier add-in as well. So your Zapier add-in looks like this, and it's actually going to be for the specific form. So since we're using Zapier to do all of this, it's important that you use the add-in as well. Once you've got your form set up, you just create a new page on your WordPress site, and you can embed the Gravity Forms. The theme I use is a very graphical interface, but if not, all you would just be doing is inputting using the form add-in. I can't even find it. Oh, there it is. You would just select the form that you want to use, and you could just add it in here, and it will just add in like standard code. So that you don't actually need to code here. It's all drag and drop. It's all adding in stuff. And obviously I just messed that up, but that won't be a problem. So I'm keeping this pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You can make it as complicated or as advanced and as pretty as you want, but ultimately what you really need to capture is the details we discussed. A payment if you want one, the phone number, the email address, a status, which I'll show you how to generate soon, message to send, number of messages that have been sent, which will always be 0 with a new order, and then if the call to action has been sent, which will be no with a new order. You then want to open up Stripe, you want to open up Zapier, and you want to start to use a webhook. The way that you integrate Gravity Forms and Zapier is actually through a webhook. So what you're looking to do, as it says here, is to pull a webhook URL for the specific form. So I'll just go ahead and do that now. So you just select Catch Hook and you go through the settings, and then it will actually give you a URL. So I'm just going to copy and paste that URL into my settings. And I'm not using any conditional logic for this one, as I've set up my logic, so required fields inside the actual form. And so now when a new form is filled in, it's actually going to send something into Zapier. So I've actually already run one of these, so it should pick that up soon. So now that I've actually run an order through, and you can actually set it to just be test details, so you don't need to enter in a real credit card number, you can see that this information has been pulled through. So it's the title of the actual form, as well as email address, my name, the order price, the first name, IP address, etc., etc. All the details that you probably want to know in order to start sending that message. So you can see that straight from here, the selection I did was actually 30 messages sent, and that was $6. On top of the original $2. So it was a total of 8 that came through. And if you log in to Gravity Forms, you can actually see that coming through and using a test card as well. As always, we want to start with a filter. This helps us make sure that we're not counting those that shouldn't be included. So what we want to do is we want to do the form title and we want to make sure that it matches. The chances of this going wrong are pretty slim, but it's a good practice to do. Because Gravity Forms actually automatically does the check for you, anytime this runs, it should actually be a successful payment, because if it was a failed payment, it just wouldn't work in the first place. But if you're using another method, I would also suggest that you make sure that if you're pulling in from Stripe or something else, that you have an area that is going to mark this as successful, so you know that the order went through and a payment was made. The next step that you want to do is actually to do a lookup of your plans. By plans, I mean the number of messages you're going to send, because what's going to happen is that as you start to add in more and more potential plans or different payment methods, you're going to want some master list of knowing that if an order comes through with the description trump text plan 1, it means send 2 messages. The way that I've used Gravity Forms, and you can actually see this by looking at the test field, is it actually tells you here, because when I filled in my actual form, I entered in the key to actually tell me. So now I get how much it was actually registered for how many messages would be sent, so I can use that. But if you're not using this method, you definitely probably want to use a utility to do a lookup and identify how many to send. But in this case, because of the way that Gravity Forms pulls this through, what I actually want to do is take this part here. So I'm going to use the formatter by Zapier in a different way. Rather than doing a lookup, I'm actually going to do a text split. So the string I would like to split is obviously that answer from earlier. And this way, it doesn't really matter how many plans I decide to add in. I can just add them straight into the Gravity Forms and just add in as many as I want if I add more quotes or change the pricing and do anything. And I don't need to touch anything on the Zapier. And all I do is I edit it inside the, it's actually the first, the Gravity Forms, not in Zapier, so which makes it a lot easier. So I'm getting an error because I skipped some of the previous steps, but I'll just go and fix that up now by clicking test and skip and test and skip. Oh, it's already done. Test, separator, segment first, so I should pull in this. And this one is actually going to be the number of messages I'm going to send. So total messages to send. So now I've got that. All I need to do is create the spreadsheet row. Of course, I could do a few other things like add someone into a MailChimp list, but I'm going to assume that you'll be able to do that fairly easily. So the next step is to just add someone in, creating a spreadsheet row. For every new order that comes in, multiple people, or one person may do multiple orders, so you definitely don't want to do a lookup here. You just want to create a new spreadsheet row in your payment worksheet. Like I said, the link is in the comments if you want to pull in our template so you don't have to spend time doing it. But now I'm just going to go through and match each of these attributes to the actual areas. I've left in payment ID and receipt number because that's what happens when you do an order directly through Stripe. However, it's really up to you how you want to do this. For example, I tend to just use the entry ID, and this way I know which order it is in case I want to go back into Gravity Forms and find the match to it. So I'll just fill these in now. Now that I've filled this in, I'll actually show you what we have hard-coded. So we've hard-coded the number of messages that have been sent to 0, and we've also done call to action as no. These are always going to be the case with the new order. It's always going to be the number of messages being sent as 0. But with the messages to send, this is going to depend on the previous step, which was identifying how many messages that we were actually going to send. And that can be through the utility lookup or the split. And in the case of us, this time it is going to be the split. So now when we test this, we still wanted to put in success. Now that we've done this, we still want to be able to enter in the payment status. So the payment status is, was the payment successful? Yes, it succeeded. And now it's the status of the order. So what is the status of this order? It's been purchased. Hasn't run, it's not in the process of running, it's just purchased. So that's what I'm going to enter in here. But you can see I've filled in all of my other fields based upon what came through. So now when I test this, what should actually happen is that a new entry should appear. 1, 2, 3, and there it goes. So as you can see, this is working perfectly. And now if I had my Zapier trigger for the next step in place, this would run. And I'm going to take you to that now.
Hi, sorry to interrupt. This is Chris here from Code Without Code. We've also built out another way to actually do the payment process for Donald Trump text. Rather than having to use Gravity Forms, Stripe and WordPress, we've actually built another walkthrough that just shows you how to do it with Typeform. If you want, with Typeform, you can attach your Stripe account to it and then process the payment that way. So if I can work out how to do this, a new video should appear here, which will just be that part that shows you how to do it using Typeform. If not, the link will be in the comments below. So it's a quicker build, a shorter build, but the outcome is fairly similar. So it will just be that payment part. Anyway, let's move on to the next part, which is the most interesting part, how to build the text message loop.
The next step is to actually send the text messages. So we're going to use our input as a Google Sheet. We're then going to pick up the change in a cell and then look up the rest of the row. We're going to pass that information through Zapier. We're going to do a lookup of a quote, and then we're going to send it as a text message. We're then going to go back to that Google row and then update the actual cell. So what this actually means is that if we've got payments that are looking like this as they're starting to land in our Google Sheet, we're going to use this sent messages as our trigger. So when this changes from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, every time it changes, this part is going to trigger the process to start. And the very last step of this process is to actually come back here, look at what the number is, add 1 to it, which of course would then make the next trigger run again. So this is basically forming a loop function. The second thing that we're going to do inside this Zap is also do a lookup. So we're going to take this number, we're going to add 1 to it, and then we're going to look up what quote is the equivalent. So this way you can have a list of quotes and then you can identify which one you want to send. So this Zap actually has quite a number of steps, about 13 of them. And the first part is setting what we want our trigger to be. And as I previously mentioned, what we're looking to do for this one is when a specific cell updates, and that cell is going to be here. So whichever one updates, we're going to try to get the entire row, which is going to include the phone number, how many messages to send, if the call to action has been sent. So in order to do that, the way that we start, as per usual, is through using Google Sheets, a new or updated spreadsheet row. We select our Google Sheet account. We select Trump text, and as I mentioned before, if you want to grab our template, you can go into the comment that's at, or go into the link that's in the comments below, and you'll be able to pull it out straight away so you don't have to manually create it and you can follow along a little bit easier. As we're using payments for this section, as I mentioned, it's on the payment column. And then we want to use the column of sent messages. So how many messages have actually been sent? If we run this, we should be able to pull up our last one. Yep, there we go. And we're just going to continue. So just so we know what we're looking at, it's updated updated message sent. As per usual, we want to set up a filter, and the filter in this case is to make sure that that current payment is active. So what is the status? So purchased, so exactly matches, and because I always spell things wrong, I will come in and highlight it and copy. So that should pass. Great. What else do we want to do? We want to make sure that the output is greater than 0. So that means the number of messages left is greater than 0. But in order to do that, we actually need to have a secondary step here. And so that is, so what we're trying to do is figure out exactly how many messages are remaining for each order. In order to do that, that's part of the reason why we have messages to send here, because all we need to do is take this number and subtract the number of messages sent from it. So if we're looking to send 30 and we've sent 0, there are still 30 remaining. If we're trying to send one message and we've sent 0, 1 is remaining. If we've got one message to send and we've sent one message, 0 are remaining. So really the way that this next step, this filter should work is if there is a number of messages left greater than 0, send. So there's a couple of different ways that we can figure out how to do that. The way that I'm going to use for this one is going to just be using the number section in the formatter by Zapier and selecting maths operation. We can always use a spreadsheet style formula, but I'll just use the maths operation for this one. So what we want to do is subtract, and we want to subtract messages to send from sent messages. And so when we do this test, we should get an answer of 1. Perfect. So that way it's working. Once again, we want to rename our step. And so I'm going to rename this messages left to send. We can now use step number 2 as a filter. So now we've got two things. Status is purchased and messages left to send is greater than 0. Once again, this should pass. While we're dealing with the number of messages to send, we also probably want to identify what number message this is. So because it starts with 0, our first message is actually going to be message number 1. Because the way that we've set the quotes up is by using 1, 2, 3, 4. So the first one is always going to be 0, and that's going to set it off. But what we actually want to do is make sure it says 1. So in order to do that, we once again use the maths equation, but in this case, I'm actually going to use a different one, and I'm going to use the spreadsheet row. So once again, you click formatter, you hit numbers, you then go to spreadsheet style formula, and we can make this one really easy. So we want to take the messages sent, messages to send, oh, my mistake, we actually need it to be messages sent messages plus 1. It's always going to be plus 1. So as this changes to 2, 3, 4, 5, it's always going to be plus 1 because that's what you're actually looking at. So create and continue. And we hit finish. So now we've got the message that we need to send, but now what we're trying to do is get to a point of actually looking up a quote. In order to look up the quote that we're going to send, we need to have first the SMS number. So we've already got 1 now, because when we ran this, what answer did we get? 1. So we've got 1. But we like to do an A, B, or even C. So we've got 3 different options. So that way we can craft our text messages to be the funniest ones up front. And we like to pick one of 3 or one of 2 based upon the fact that we will often see people signing up their friends, and not just one friend but 2 or 3. So it's kind of nice for everyone to get different messages rather than everyone getting the same one. It does mean you have to have a lot more quotes, and you can see in this case we've got about 49 messages that we can send, but it's actually 106 quotes. So what this means is that it's up to you. You can drop off this if you just want to keep this as delete this column and you just want it to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's totally fine. Everyone will get the same order. Everyone will get the same messages. But what we want to do is actually make it so it's different. So in order to do that, we now need to pick randomly either A or B. Luckily for us, there is another built-in Zapier formatter tool that allows you to do a lookup, it's a utility, and it gets you to pick a random answer. So you can do a lookup table, which would say what matches this. And we want to choose random, and we're going to keep this really easy and just go A and B. Default A. So if worst case happens, it doesn't actually run, it's still going to pick A. So we'll just go A. Just go A, B. So we're just going to call this one A-B test, even though it's not really a test. We're just picking either A or B. And now if we put this number and this result, or this result and this result together, we will get 1A or 1B or 2A or 2B, depending on the numbers. So how do we randomize and how do we look that up? Well, there's actually a Google Sheet section called Lookup Spreadsheet Row. So if we were to look up Spreadsheet Row, and we were to look up this column and try to find a match to 1A or 1B, we can pull in the entire row here. So for us, we would just be pulling in the quote. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So this is actually looking up our quote for us. So we select Trump text, we select quotes this time, not payments. The lookup column would have to be the first column, so it's going to be SMS number. Well, let's just double check, yes. And then the lookup value. So now we actually take our results from the previous 2 steps. 1, A. And now when we run this, it's going to try to look up 1A. So if this is working, the answer we should get should be this one. He referred to my hands. If they're small, something else must be small. I guarantee you there's no problem. I guarantee it. Yeah, I'm not going to do a Trump impression right now. So let's see if this works. Perfect. So now column D is actually going to be the quote that we want to use. And so that's what we're going to send out in a text message. So just to make sure we know, quote, lookup. And so now we can get to the really fun bit, which is sending the quote. This is exactly why we're here. Now, if you really wanted, you could make it so it would tweet out the quote instead, or if you use Mandrill, you could email someone the quote, or if you wanted to send it in Slack to someone, you could do that. So you could just look through each of these add-ins and see other ways that you can use a similar process. So we want to send an SMS. Make sure you've set up your Twilio account. Make sure you've added a phone number as well. So select your Twilio account, and then all we need to do is select the number. And in this case, I've set one up called Trump text, and then send the to number. So in this case, what we want to use as the to number is phone number. Now, one thing to keep in mind is you've really got to make sure that your formatting of numbers is in line with what Twilio wants. So this means that you've got to put your international code first, unless you're sending to a US number, and then I believe it automatically does it. But I've had some problems with numbers in the past. So you can read this help here. But I always find that you really need to make sure that whoever's filling in your forms is entering in their numbers in international format. The biggest problem we have with Kanye text is that actually people fill in the forms and they type in the wrong phone number or in the wrong format, and then the message doesn't send, they get upset, they ask for their money back, and then what we end up doing is going in, modifying the phone number format, and then manually making it run. So you've done that. Now the message that you want to send is obviously from the quote lookup, and it's going to be quote. You want to make sure that large messages is yes. The reason for that is that, as you can see in the quotes here, I've got this automatic character lookup, and you can see that there's quite a few that actually are more than just one message. And so if you have no, you'll just send the 160-ish characters rather than the full quote. Yes, it's going to cost you more, but you know, the cost of text messages is pretty small. So you can test that. I'm going to skip the test because that's not a real phone number and some. So now that we have sent, or at least tested that the message actually sends, the next thing to do is to come back into the payment tab and update this from 0 to 1. And that's obviously going to start the whole process again. But depending on how you want your timing will depend on the next step. What we like to do is actually make a random number. So we pick a number somewhere between like 15 and 130, and that's the minutes that we will then delay the writing of the number to the cell or the column. So this means that the messages are not only being randomized from that list, but also the timing and the interval between them is random. You could just make it so it's always the same, but we're going to actually set it up so it will randomize. So rather than doing the randomizing number first, what I'm going to do is just put in the delay and then add in a step between it. So you could delay until, which means that, you know, all your messages get sent out at the same time, but you don't want that. You want to delay for. And you could hard code a number in. So if you wanted to send them every 15 minutes, you would say 15 minutes and then you'd be done. But what we actually want to do is have that random number. So the way that you generate a random number in Zapier is with our favorite built-in app, which is Formatter. You then go into numbers and you want to select the spreadsheet style formula. And in this case, so one trick is you actually click on this little button here. And if you go and search for random number, you'll actually get a max and min. And so this is what we're using. And no, I do not recall exactly what it is. I always look it up. And so minimum, we don't want messages to send every 15 minutes. We probably want them to send every 20 to 30. However, I already know that Zapier in some cases and some plans will have a 10 or 5 minute delay from the time it updates, from the time it actually runs, could be 5 minutes. So it's 5 plus 15. So 15 is fine for us. How often do we want these messages to send? I would prefer that they probably sent, you know, every 70 minutes. I'm going to say that could be, so it's basically every hour. So we'll do that. We'll rename it so we know what this is. Random. We're going to create it and then it will spit us back a random number. And so today, 21 minutes is the delay. So then we go back in our delay for, and we change this from being a hard-coded value to being the answer from step 8. There we go. So every time it runs, it's going to not only send that quote, a random quote, well, random of the two options, it is then going to randomly pick how long it delays before the next step. And so then what we do is we go back to our spreadsheet and we update this number from being 0 to being that number plus 1. And so now we get to go Google Sheets. And now what we're trying to do is update a row. This means you're going to have to tell it which row you want to update. And so we need to use a custom field for that. So we start with selecting the spreadsheet, trump text. The worksheet is going to be payments. And now with this one, don't select it here. Okay, that's the one mistake I see happening time and time again. People select it here and wonder why it doesn't work, because now you're essentially hard coding it to a row. What you need to do is select use a custom value, and now you put the row ID in it. And the row ID comes from the previous field, which is message sent. So in other words, what it's doing is asking for the row that you're dealing with. Now it's not row number, it's row ID. In most cases it's the same, but it says row ID, so let's write that. Now whatever you write in these columns, or in these parts here, are actually going to be updating this entire row. So for what we're trying to do, all we really want to update is the number of sent messages. And I know it says 0, but as per usual, don't think in order of what your absolute numbers are at this point. You're trying to think about where it's going to be pulled from. So messages to send isn't going to change. It's always going to be whatever the answer is. In this case, it'll be 30 or 1. Sent messages are going to be the number of messages left to send, or the message number. In this case, it's actually the message number. Because now when this runs, what's going to happen is this is going to be updated from 0 to 1. Then what will happen is this will trigger because something has changed. It will check the filter. It will go, what is 30 minus 1? It's 29. Is that above 0? Yes, it is. Add 1 to 1, which is 2. Do an A-B test, A or B, it'll be B or A, it'll say 2B or 2A, it'll look up. So you see, this is how our loop function works. And so right now, this will function and this will work. But there's an extra trick, of course, as I say that, of course, there's a delay, or there's an error. And so that error is because I did not go create and continue. It needs to run that test or else it doesn't work. An alternative for running the test is actually to just skip it. But if you've got the option and it's not doing anything live, just create and continue, and we'll see this change to 1. Oh, this one changed to 1. So now that we've done this, this is all going to work. I can trigger this on, and anytime a new order comes through via either our regular payment method or our free method, and I'll put a link in the comments to the video for this one, as I mentioned in the previous one. You can now leave it, it's fine. But we like to do a little bit more to create a little bit of the virality. So if you've ever signed up to our Kanye text service, you will find that on your very last message, what we do is we actually send a call to action to you. And that's what this call to action sent is. What it does is it actually tells you at the very last message that you receive that you've been signed up to Kanye Text, and it incites you to sign someone else up. So for this one, we're going to do something similar. With Kanye, we use a Kanye quote and we adjust it slightly. But this one, we're going to do something similar. So the way that we do that is by running a filter. The filter is trying to identify if this is the last message for that order. And if it is, continue. If not, it just stops, and that's fine. So the way that we do that is that we set a filter for messages left, and the output is a number, so it won't matter, exactly matches 1. So in other words, is this the last message? Now we've pulled in this answer here and it was 0. So it was 1 minus 0 was 1. So therefore it's the last message. It's actually the first and the last message. But this one would only trigger when this is 29. 30 take 29 is 1. So that's what you want. And so we're going to go test. Yes, this would run. Perfect. Now what we want to do is set up another message. And that final message is going to be Twilio again. Set up exactly the same as the previous section. But this time we're going to hard code our quote in rather than doing a lookup. So we're going to send from Trump text. The number is going to be the same as the phone number above. There we go, friend's number. And what we're going to say, so once you've selected that, you can type in a message. We like to include our URL, and what we do is we try to get people to go and sign up their friend. Most of the time we find that this is a really good way to get friends signing each other up. And then of course, what ends up happening is they think one friend signed them up, but actually it was someone else. And so this viral loop happens where groups of friends or communities, and we see it across every couple of weeks, we'll see a bunch of orders come through from what appears to be a similar area within, an hour or two of each other. And we think it's schools or universities or just groups of friends signing each other up. So we make sure we do this because it's a good way to get more sales. Make sure that you select send large message, and then that is the final message to send. We want to skip. Now what we want to do is go back into our payment tab and actually update call to action sent to be yes, and then update the status to be completed. So that way we can quickly see who's completed and who hasn't. So in order to do that, once again, we need to duplicate exactly what we previously did with our Google Sheet update. So we update a spreadsheet row. And like I've mentioned, because there's that filter here, this is only ever going to run on the very last message. Select Trump, select payment. And here is the tricky part. Remember that you don't want to hard code this. This needs to be a custom field. It needs to be the row ID. I always will reference back when I do this. There are lots of different ways that I could have referenced it. Like anytime we've done this lookup, I probably could have used the row ID, but I always try to keep it the same and always use the number 1 step. So then what we want to do is we want to go status and we want to go completed. And then call to action sent, yes. And then that is it for us. So now we can create test and continue, and this should be updated. Completed, done. So now the final part of the Donald Trump text is what to do when you actually get an SMS reply. This happens a lot, and most of the time people say things like, who is this? I don't have your number. Lots of people say go away. A few people actually figure out what's going on and they'll start sending you messages back. So what is it that you can do with that information? So what we've done with Kanye text is if we receive a text message back, we actually post it directly to our Twitter account. Now, there's a few tricks here how to filter certain things out so it doesn't get posted live to your Twitter account. But for this example, what I'm going to do is show you how to tweet it out and then also send a message, an email to the person that signed them up in the first place. And how we're going to do that is using Twilio's inbound SMS. We're then going to use Zapier. We're going to write them to a Google Sheet. And then we're also going to use Mandrill to send out the message. In fact, we'll probably just use Zapier's inbuilt email functionality, but you could really use anything you wanted. You could post it onto Facebook, you could post it into a Slack channel. There are countless different ways that you could use this. So let's just continue. When you first set up a text message or a phone number on Twilio, if you actually were to send a message out and then send one back to that number, you'll actually be sent back an error saying that it hasn't been configured. So before we can do anything, what we actually need to do is create a messaging service. Now, you don't need any tech skills to do this. All you really need to do is select a friendly name, type in whatever it is you want, and then all you need to do is go and fill in the actual URL. So you can see here when it says callback, you can just do this. And from our experience, you don't actually need to figure out what it is and actually understand what's going on here. It just needs something there. I'm sure if we were to sit through and go through this, we would actually figure out exactly how we can use this properly. But for our example, you really don't need to do anything but tick this button, type in your URL, and then hit save. And when you first set up a Twilio number, if you actually send a message to your number, you'll actually receive an error saying that there's nothing on the account. In order to get around that, and you will need to if you want to set it up for inbound messaging, in other words, receiving text messages, what you need to do is go and create a messaging service. So we've got two here, but this one that I've selected is actually fairly easy to set up. All you need to do is go create a new one, type in a friendly name, click process inbound message, and then type in a URL. Make sure you put HTTP at the start or HTTPS, otherwise you'll get an error when you hit save. You then have to go into your actual phone number that you've got set up and configure it to work with that. So basically you match your text message or your number to your messaging service, and then that means when you receive a message, you won't get an error. Now that we've configured that, we can actually start on our Zap. So what we do as per usual is open it up and give our Zap a good name. So incoming SMS Trump. We then select Twilio this time as our trigger, and it says new SMS when an SMS is sent to your number. There are lots of other ways as well. For example, when you get a new call, or when there's a new recording or something else, but for this purpose, we're looking at a new SMS. We then make sure we select the right account, and of course we select the phone number, the same one that we used. In this case, as I mentioned, we are using Kanye for this example. We then fetch and continue and make sure that you've actually sent a message, or else this will not work. Then our next step requires us to write this into a Google Sheet. And if you go to the link in the description, you'll get our template, and it's really basic. It's date, phone number, incoming message, email, signed up. In other words, who actually signed up this person. So in order to do this step, what we're actually going to do is, now that you've actually tested it and have sent a message back, you should be able to view the message and the number that it came from. So now what you want to do is you want to use these details to identify what order it was. In other words, what payment, who was the person who actually signed them up. Now this is essentially the same as what we've previously been doing, but instead what you're going to use to look up is the actual phone number and then match it back to an email address rather than using the row ID. So the way that we do that is, as per usual, look up spreadsheet row. We want to select our account, then we want to select the payment, or we want to select the spreadsheet, followed by the payment. Lookup column this time is going to be phone number because that's all we actually have. Phone number. And the lookup value is here. But if you actually look at the order of the way the phone numbers are generated out of Twilio, you will actually notice that they tend to start with a plus, What you actually need to do here is actually drop off the plus from the start to make sure that it aligns with the same way that your phone number has been set up. So in order to do that, we use another part of the formatter tool, and this one is actually called text, and it is going to be called split. And then what we're looking for is the plus, the plus there, and the input is going to be the phone number. Now you want to return the last, or the second in this case, it should still be the same, and it will actually split this phone number and drop off the plus. So now when you do it, you still get that. Now this is what you use in your input. Now when you do it, we should be able to run this order, and we go search and continue, and now we will receive an exact match. Here we go. So the person that signed up was me, of course. So we go finish. Now we already have the details of who it is that actually signed this up. Where did this message come from? We can now do the really easy step of either sending it out via Twitter, and we do that just by selecting Twitter, selecting create a tweet, continue, selecting the Twitter account. We're just going to use Kanye Text for this example, and say and then we take the actual content of the message, new SMS, body. I would also suggest throwing in a hashtag, but I would try not to include any personal details of who it was that sent it out for obvious reasons. You could, if you wanted to make sure someone could follow along who that was, is actually use a split similar to what we did here and take the last 3 digits of the phone number or another way to give them a unique identifier without really giving away who they are. Especially if someone's tweeting back or sending back a lot of messages, it's funny for anyone sitting at home who signed them up to see who it actually is or if it's the same person. So this will actually run this. So I'm actually just going to skip. And then from here, what we want to do is we want to email that person and let them know, hey, your friend just responded with a message. So we could use Mandrill, we could use lots of different ways to send the message, but for making it easy, we're just going to use the email functionality from Zapier. But the concept is still the same. You use the email address associated with the order, your friend replied to Trump text with and we want body. There we go, done. So you could style this, make it nicer, put an intro, put an outro, follow along on Twitter at or whatever it is that your handle is. You may want to use HTML if you want to look up how to do that to make sure it's a link, because these emails are just plain text. And then if you will test it, everything should run perfectly. And so that is actually the final step of how to build Trump text.
So with that last part, you can also actually write it into one of the worksheets inside Google Sheet as well, just so you have a record. But that's really up to you. Anyway, if you want to find out a bit more about how we built this and you want to go through our actual example with writing instead, just go to codewithoutcode.com/Trump text build. Our intention is to build out a number of different work streams just like this, which will actually show you how to build different products. So please go in, subscribe, follow us on YouTube and on Twitter, as we would love for you to follow along the journey of becoming a developer without actually knowing how to code.